So today I'm going to talk about the first death that I ever experienced in my life, a close family member passing away. This happened when I was 3 years old, so I'm talking about something that happened literally like 23 years ago, which is crazy to think about that I'm getting old enough to talk about stuff that happened over 20 years ago. It's pretty insane. Makes me feel very old, but it's going to be weird because this is stuff that like I've experienced and I've like I'm going to talk about things that I've done and how I reacted to the loss, but none of which I actually remember myself because I was so young. So it's all stuff that my family has told me like about myself because I don't actually remember it myself. Yeah, it's going to be very strange. But basically, my Aunt Joan, she was my grandmother's sister, so she was actually my great aunt, and she was a nun. That was her thing. She converted, or she didn't convert to Christianity, but she decided when she was very young to become a nun and do that whole thing. So her whole life, she was, a nun that traveled around the whole world. She spent a lot of time living in South America, living, of course, in Italy and the Vatican, and she actually, there was a photo of her with Pope John Paul II, the two of them standing next to each other talking. So she actually knew the Pope, which I thought was really amazing, especially looking back at it. But when I was a kid, I called him the Poop instead of the Pope. um, so basically, okay, so important thing to talk about here. When my Aunt Joan was a baby, she was born with a serious heart defect, and the doctor said that she wasn't going to live past 15 years old. She was going to die at a very young age, and she wasn't going to live very long, and that she wasn't going to live a very long life. She ended up living to be about, I think she was about 66 or 67, so she lived much longer than the doctor certainly said she was going to live. But I, according to my family, according to my mom especially, like I loved my Aunt Joan, and I loved spending time with her, and she was, someone that meant a lot to me. Again, I don't actually remember her. So I obviously I've seen photos of her, but I don't actually remember like, a memory of me spending time with her because there's very few things I remember from that time in my life. The only thing I remember in my life is actually two things. I remember almost drowning to death, which is a story I told before on this channel. And then also, actually, I remember my mom getting the phone call and reacting to my aunt's death and crying because I've never seen my mom cry before. So that memory stuck with me, like really stuck with me. And I was only 3 years old. So I actually remember my mom crying about my aunt dying, but I don't actually remember my aunt, which is kind of fucked up. There's also another aunt that died that took her own life, and I told that story as well. How she died, how my Aunt Joan died. So this is in 2001. I think it's like July of 2001. That's around the time. So I just turned 3. I wasn't even like 3.5 or 3 3/4, almost turning 4. I was like very, very, very little. We like just moved to our house because before we lived like in a tiny apartment building, and we lived so we moved in the house that I continued to live at for like almost 20 more years after that. So we just moved, and my parents wanted to go away on like a trip or something, like they wanted to travel somewhere, so they wanted someone to be able to watch me while they were gone, and they picked my aunt to be that person. So she flew in from Italy to visit, and then eventually to watch me while my parents went away. While she was on the plane, she died of a heart attack. She died on the plane, coming over to our house to watch me. So that's what makes the story even crazier, because imagine if she didn't die on the plane. She instead died, maybe a day or two after that, while she was alone with me in the house. And obviously I'm too young to know how to, 911 or anything like that. So that would have been an even more tragic situation. Who knows what would have happened? A 3-year-old being left alone with a dead adult in the house, like that would have been insane. Like that's really the part of the story that really sticks out to me, is like how it could have been so much worse as fucked up as it is that she died at that moment, like dying on an airplane is horrible, but imagine if she died, just a day or two later. Like that would have been definitely much worse. And then another thing that is often told about me and how I reacted to my aunt's death. So at the funeral, it was an open casket. She's laying there dead, and it's an open casket. And I go up to the casket, and I'm touching her body, and I'm shaking it, saying, "Wake up, Aunt Joan, wake up." And everyone's crying at the funeral because he's a little 3-year-old boy not understanding what death is, not knowing what is actually happening, what happened, that she is gone and she is never coming back. Me just thinking that she's sleeping and she needs to wake up. I'm shaking her dead body, telling her to wake up. She needs to wake up. I don't actually remember this, but that is crazy. That is insane. It's definitely something. So, yeah, she was, from what I remember, I don't remember anything of her, but from what I was told about her, that she's like one of the nicest people you can ever meet. She was a nun, but she really lived up to that. Like, she was just, she was like a saint. Like, she was such a great person that, really just was really good and treated everyone with respect and was just such a great human being overall. Very kind, very generous, that sort of thing. I wish she stuck around longer so I would have actually got to know her more. Because I also had an uncle, so it would be my grandmother and her brother that died in the 1980s, long before I was born. So my grandmother went through a lot. There are a lot of family members that she, lost, and it was tough on her. And then she ended up, she died in my grandmother died in 2009, and I wish I had more time with her. But my aunt, I don't even remember her at all. Same thing with my other aunt, that took her life. There's so many people that I hear about, and I wish I got to meet them. Same thing with my grandmother, my father's mother, who died about 2 years before I was born. It's sad, like hearing about people, about family members, and that sort of thing, but you never even met them, or like they died when you were so young you didn't even get to know them. Obviously it's not as bad as other people who their mothers or their fathers died when they were very, very, very little. That's obviously so much worse, but it still makes me feel a little sad whenever I think about that I didn't get to actually know them and they weren't around a little bit longer. It is sad.